Good evening, everyone. In the last session, we identified the one of the important example on this particular dependency injection. So how this particular dependency injection is going to work internally. We identify the simple example here. Getting the pen. Now we'll identify the bean related section. So how this particular bean is going to create and how it is going to work internally. Now we'll identify this particular bean related section. So it's something like containing all the beans, like the container, how it is going to manage this particular bean internally from this particular new keyword to finalize method, how it is going to call internally. The section we need to understand. So as I explained, basically we have a two types of containers here. What are the two types of containers? First one is bean factory. Okay, and another one is application context. Now what we are doing basically, first we are trying to discuss about the bean factory, and later we'll try to discuss about this particular application context, how it is going to work internally. Okay, so this is the simple example we identified here whenever we are trying to discuss about the main class here. Now you can see here we are trying to create the bean factory, and internally what exactly this particular bean factory is doing, it is trying to load this particular bean factory with help of this particular bean ID. So and the specified method we are calling here. Whatever the particular specified method we define, this is calling. Right? Instead of defining explicitly with help of this particular no keyword, we are trying to creating explicitly. Now what we need to understand here, how this particular bean factory it is going to work and what are all the implementation classes. The first implementation class we identified, something like a class path resource. Basically, XML Bean Factory is the implementation of this particular bean factory, and the XML Bean Factory internally it is expecting the resource object. First, what we will do, we'll identify this particular different example, file related example here. Okay, the file system resource we are going to discuss here. Now, what we need to understand regarding this particular file system resource, we need to provide the path here, where exactly the particular file is available. So we already discussed this example. Now, anyway, I'm trying to provide this information. This is the particular file path we are having. Now I'm trying to copy this. Getting the pen. Now I'm trying to copy and I will provide the file with help of this particular path here. Now you can see what I'm doing here. Now you can observe. Here now you can observe this is the particular file path we are having. Now whenever I'm trying to run this, so the same whatever the output we identified, the same output we are getting here. Now you can see I'm trying to create this particular person object. ID is something like 42, and the first name we are having Ram, and the last name we define. So only three property we are having here. Getting the point? This is important, we need to understand carefully. Okay, now you can see after this, now what I'm doing here, the file system resource we identified. One second. Let me give the link. Okay, so back to here. Now what I'm doing here, I'm trying to providing this particular file system resource here. The particular file system resource internally, what is doing here, is trying to find out this particular path. Based on this particular path here, it is trying to load this particular file here. Okay, the difference is basically file system is expecting with help of the like a fully qualified path, whatever the path we are going to use, the particular file. And what about this particular class path? Class path basically internally it will try to use the important information basically inside this particular source directory. So inside this particular source directory, if you are trying to provide any file, so the particular whatever the file we are trying to access here, it will try to load from the source directory. If the file is not available, like we are going to get in a file not found exception here. Okay, the difference is basically class path, it will try to look up the file. Those files are available under the source directory, And the file system, basically it is going to expect the fully qualified path here. So then only the particular file is going to load here. Otherwise, we are going to get the file related exceptions here. Okay, the exception we already identified here. Now back to here. This is the differences between class path as well as file system. Now we need to discuss about this particular XML Beam Factory. XML Beam Factory is one of the implementation of this particular Beam Factory. Can you depend? And another one, what we need to understand here, we need to discuss about the important information about the different informations. Okay, XML Beam Factory is a implementation class, and internally it is expecting the resource update. We identify the class path as well as file system. So we already discussed this particular different resource classes. Now if I'm going to show you abstract resource and resource. Now if you see this, here we identified this and we identified this particular two classes and URL. URL basically, if you are trying to give with some URL related information, like if it is not available in the current directory, if it is available in the some other directory, we'll provide this particular URL resource here. Okay, and these two are the not important here, the byte related and input stream. Basically, if you are trying to give any input related information, we identify the file system whenever we are discussing inside the core Java, the writer and resource classes we identify. So if you're trying to provide the input so that we can load this particular input stream resource here. Okay, so now if I'm going to show you this particular example, how it is going to work internally, instead of this particular file system resource, and what is expecting a input stream. Okay, it is expecting input stream. So if I want to give this particular input stream, what is the input stream we can provide? So this is not the correct example. Now I'm trying to paste it here. Okay, we will use later. Now system.in. Now we are trying to providing this particular input stream. But whenever I'm trying to give this particular input stream, what happens internally? How this particular example it is going to load? Now you can see we are getting an exception. We need to identify here what we need to understand here. So resource loaded through this particular input stream and contain a open stream here cannot determine getting the pen. Now you can see this is the some exception we are getting here. So we are getting some exception. Explicitly specify the validation mode on your XML Beam definition resource. So this is not readed, like this is not required in our example what we are trying to discuss. So these two are the important class path or file system related. So any one of this particular example is we can use. Right now we cannot go for this particular input stream related, like the input to whatever we are discussing here. Getting the point. These two are the very important here. If you're trying to work in the real time also, we'll try to specify the particular XML file in the getting the point in the resource directory. Inside the resource directory will load automatically. Okay, inside the resource directory it will automatically load here. Basically will contain the two files here. First one is main file. Inside the main file we are going to use Java, and another file we are going to use the resource here. Okay, this is important, and will contain one more folder, something like a test. Inside the test also we are going to create the Java folder, and we are trying to create the one more, something like a resource folder. In the real time scenarios it will look like inside this particular main folder, the original whatever the classes we are going to create, it will available inside this, and inside this particular test, the test related classes like JUnit or Mockito related section will try to use inside this particular test folder. But everything, the main will available under this particular source only, and the test also will available under the source. Source is the topmost directory. Getting the point? This is important. So whenever we are using, either we can use the file system or we can go for the class path. These are all the two important resource classes we identified. These are all the enough here. No need to discuss the remaining section, how it is working internally. Okay. Now we already identified we have a lot of classes we are going to discuss it, like byte array, and if you're trying to discuss about the URL related, okay, the URL related information we can use it. Now I'm trying to discuss about the application context here. Okay, so as we identified here, Bean Factory is the one container and another one is the application context. Okay, we identified which is having implemented by the one of the implementation class called XML Bean Factory. Now, so it is expecting multiple classes. Now we identify the each and every class how it is working. So if I'm going to discuss about the application context, now let me comment out this. If I'm trying to discuss about this particular application context, how it is going to work. Here, I'm trying to create this particular application context, and now I'm trying to create this particular context. And now you can see application context is also interface. Application context is also interface. Now you can see it is also one of the interface we are having. Getting the point. Now we need to identify the implementation classes. What are the implementation classes we are having? So we are having three implementation classes. What are the three implementation classes? First one is class path XML. Getting the point. Class path XML application context we are having. Now if you see this particular class is having some different constructor parameter. Now this is the default one, and another one is expecting application context as a parent object, and now you can provide this particular config location one parameter, and another one is expecting with multiple parameters, like he is expecting string array. And if you are not interested, you can provide the path and you can provide the class type here. Okay, we are having different types of this particular constructor, but most of the cases what we will do, we'll try to use this particular class path related information, and here we will try to provide the file name. Whatever this particular file name we are having, I'm going to copy this particular file name. Right after copying this, now I'm going to copy these two sections here. Okay, I'm going to copy this particular two sections, and I will try to modify. Instead of Bean Factory, I'm going to modify to this particular context here. Okay, now if I'm going to run this example, now whatever we identified earlier, the same output we are getting here. Whatever we identified in the earlier, we are getting the same. But if you observe carefully, if I'm going to close others here, so if you observe carefully, application context I'm opening it, and internally it will try to extend from this particular listable Bean Factory. Now you can see, so some case we are trying to extending Bean Factory. Okay, so Bean Factory is the super class. Getting the point. This is the Bean Factory, and Bean Factory internally it is trying to extending from this particular application context. So whatever the method we are having inside this particular Bean Factory, we are going to use inside this particular application context. The first method we are using Bean Factory dot get bean method. Whatever the method we are calling this is coming from the where. Now we need to understand. If I'm going to click on control verb, now you can see here get bean definition count, get bean definition names, and for types here, and I am getting bean of type and bean of type we are having. So these are all the different methods we are having. Now you can see these are all the methods we are having inside this particular listable Bean Factory. Now if I'm going to show you this particular Bean Factory, now you can see any method. What is the method we are called here? So this method get bean method. Now it is declare this particular object, and it is trying to throw bean exception. It is trying to throw this particular bean exception, and how this particular bean exception is defined here. So something like a nested runtime exception, and they are trying to override this particular two constructors here. They are trying to override this particular two constructors. Now we already identified the particular exception handling, how it is implemented here. Now observe carefully, this is implemented by Rod Johnson. So this is the author of this particular Spring framework. Getting the point. So every information we can able to see, so inside this particular classes only. Getting the point. This is, we'll call it as the open source here. We are able to see all the information, how they each and every class and each and every method and each and every interface implemented internally. Okay, come back to here. Because of this particular bean factory, we are calling this particular get bean. And now what you need to understand here. So application context. Application context basically internally, it is extending from the bean factory. Along with this particular bean factory, it is going to have some additional information. So the first one, the main advantage we are going to work whenever we are trying to work on this particular application context is, so I18N. This is the important concept here. So basically, this will call it as a internalization. So it will try to convert one language into another language. So this particular section we are going to identify only in the application context. This particular feature, it is not available inside this particular bean factory. Okay. So this is the advantage we are going to get whenever we are discussing this particular application context. Now, how we are using it? The same here, whatever the example we identified, application context, and we are trying to providing the implementation class. Now, if you say this class path XML application context, and internally, it is trying to extending this particular section, abstract XML application context. And now internally, it is trying to extending one more class. Okay, now you can see it is trying to extending one more class. Okay, so these are all the different classes we are having. Now finally what we are doing is, so where is the particular implementation here. Now you can see resource loader we are having. So this is not the class. So resource loader, where it is implemented, I think this. Now you can see configurable application context. Internally, it is extending application context. Getting the point. So finally, whatever the class we created, like a class path XML application context, it is extending this particular class, abstract XML application context. Now, this abstract XML application context internally, it is extending this particular class, abstract refreshable config application context. Now, if I'm going to show you this internally, it is extending one more classes. So these are all the abstract classes. So we have the big hierarchy. If I want to understand this particular, the class path XML application context, how it is implemented. But finally, what we are doing is we are trying to call abstract application context here, and the abstract application context internally, it is trying to implement this configurable application context. Now finally, the configurable application context is trying to extending application context. Okay, this is an interface, and this particular interface, if I'm going to show you the listable bean factory and bean factory. Okay, if I'm going to show here, this is the topmost interface here. Bean factory is the topmost interface. Getting the point. This is the hierarchy we need to understand, how the bean factory as well as application context we are having internally relations here. Internally relations here. Now I'm going to close all the other files here, because it is not required to debug the code what exactly it is doing internally. Just we can understand the differences here. Application context, it is like a what we can call it as a advantage of this particular application context. First, it is extending from this particular bean factory, and it is going to like get all the features whatever we use in the bean factory. Along with that, it is having some additional features, those are not available under this particular bean factory here. Okay, the first one we identified here, internalization, and the second one is, so we have a different ways of loading the resource files. Getting the point. So we have a different ways of loading this particular files here. This is important, we need to understand here. Okay, so this is one of the important information we need to understand here. Okay, now another important information, basically it will try to contain the application context. We can publish the different types of events. We'll discuss this particular events here, because event basically, if I'm trying to perform something, if I'm trying to delete something, if I'm trying to update something, so these particular events are going to trigger here. So these are all the three advantages we are going to get from this particular application context. The first one, so this is, we'll call it as a internalization, and the second one, So generic, like it is a generic way of loading the resource files. Okay, generic way of loading the resource files here. And the third one, event section. Event section. These three are the additional features we are going to get whenever we are trying to discuss about the application context. And these features not available inside this particular Beam Factory. Okay, this is important, we need to understand. Now, so what is a simple logic we implemented? First one, the class path XML application context. It is one of the implementation class of this particular application context. Now I am going to discuss about the another implementation classes. What is the another implementation classes we are having? Let me comment out this, and I will copy this, and here I will paste this particular section, and I am going to modify. So file system, get in the pen, file system XML application context. Now you can see. So this is the another important information we need to understand. File system. Same way, whatever we identify class path resource and file system resource, same way in the application context we are having these two classes. Get in the pen. These two classes internally, it is not going to connect with any resource object internally. So by like internally it is implemented as the resource object, but explicitly it is not going to take any resource object. Okay, now if you observe carefully what you need to understand here. So this is I'm trying to pass this particular string, the particular config location, and this is our configuration location where we are trying to configure all the information here. Okay, this is get in the pen. This is we need to understand very carefully how this particular section is going to work internally. Now if I'm going to run, what happening internally? We are getting an exception. So what is the exception? Basically, whatever we provided spring-code.xml, this particular file is not available. File not exception we are getting. Whatever the file not found exception, we already familiar with this particular exception. Now you can see the system cannot find the whatever the file we specified here. Okay. Now what we can do? We need to pass this particular information. Whatever this particular file, the path we are having, the path we need to pass here. Now if I'm going to copy this, and here I can provide the path. Okay, here I can provide this particular path here. So let me, these are all the not required, only the two changes it's required here. Now you can see whatever the output we are getting is the same output. Getting the point. So this is the simple differences we identified here regarding this particular class path XML application context as well as the file system XML application context. So any questions? Any questions regarding this particular application context? Okay, if you don't have anything, now I'm going to discuss about the Bean life cycle. Getting the point. This is the another important information we need to understand here. Okay, so
Sir,
back. Yes, tell.
sir, when you say bean, does that simply mean object, sir?
Yes. So if you observe here, this is the one kind of bean, the greeting service IMPL. Okay. In the Spring terminology, whatever we are trying to creating, so this all the classes we'll call it as a beans here, because this each and every information we're trying to providing under this particular bean tag here.
Okay.
Okay. Now come back to here. Now what I'm doing here, I'm trying to provide the bean life cycle. Life cycle basically how this particular object is going to create and how this particular object is going to destroy, and before destroying what are all the operations is going to perform internally. So this section we need to understand here. Okay, so now what we need to understand here, I'm trying to providing this particular hierarchy first. First it will try to create the object here. Okay, here it will try to create the object. So something like we are trying to instantiate this particular object here. Okay, here we are trying to instantiate this particular object. For example, the particular greeting service. Okay, whatever this particular greeting service we created, so we are ready to create object of this is a step one. And after this, if we are having this particular class is having any properties, now what we will do, we'll try to populate this particular properties here. Okay, we'll try to populate this particular properties information. So, and this is the second step. And after this, now what we will do here, we'll try to implement, like if this particular bean, whatever this particular bean we are having greeting service, if this particular bean is implementing one of the bean called bean name aware. Okay, I'm trying to create one class called bean name aware. So whenever the particular bean is implement this particular bean name aware, internally, what happens internally, it will try to call this particular method set bean name. Okay, this is the third step. And once this particular step is completed, it will try to look up the another method. So another, the interface here, if you are trying to implement bean factory aware. So bean name aware, and we are having bean factory aware. Okay, bean factory aware. And this particular bean factory aware, internally it is contain one more method, something like set bean factory. So here we are trying to set the container object here. If you are trying to override this, like if I'm trying to implement this particular interface, we'll override this particular method and we'll set the particular bean factory object. Okay, along with this, and now we are having some pre-initialization and post-initialization. Pre-initialization basically before this particular object to create, it will try to initialize here. Now I'm going to write here something like a pre-initialization. And so one more we are having something like here I'm going to write post initialization. Okay, post initialization. So now what we can do, this particular post initialization before destroying this particular object here. Okay, before destroying this particular object, it will try to initialize something. And inside this particular pre-initialization, before creating an object, it will try to initialize something. So if we want to do something, we can call the pre-initialization. And the same way, we can go for the post-initialization. I will provide this particular information how it is going to work. After this particular method, pre-initialization, getting the pen. And what we will do, we are going to call the custom method. Whatever the custom method we are writing. So for example here, say greeting. Okay, say greeting is one of the custom method. So inside this particular, after pre-initialization and before the post-initialization, the custom methods will call. And after this, it will try to call the post-initialization, and after this, it will try to destroy the methods here. Okay, it will try to destroy the methods as well as it will try to destroy the object information. So this is the hierarchy we need to understand. First, it will try to create an object. So that the stage we'll call it as a instantiating this particular object, and we are trying to populating if we are having any properties, and it will try to look up this particular interfaces. First one is bean name aware, and the second one is bean factory aware. If we are trying to implement this, it will call this particular methods here, set bean name and set bean factory. Get in the pen. And later it will look up this particular pre-initialization. If you're trying to work with the pre-initialization basically again, we need to work on the bean post processors. We are having one interface, like we are going to use this particular bean post processor. We are going to implement this. Getting the point. We are going to implement this, and this particular bean post processor is going to call before initializing this particular object. So the section we'll call it as a pre-initialization, and the same the bean post processor are going to call like before destroying this particular object, that section we'll call it as a post initialization. Okay, these are all the different stages we are having whenever we are trying to create an object of this particular the beans whatever we are going to provide inside our configuration file. Okay, now we'll see the simple example how it is going to work internally. How it is going to work internally. Okay, now you can see if I want to create this particular the bean related information, now what we are going to do here, we'll try to implement this particular. So far whatever we discuss, let me close this, and here only I am going to provide. So greeting service we are not using the round table. Okay, a round table. And if I'm going to implement here, first one is bean name aware. Okay, whenever we are trying to implement this particular bean name aware, what happens internally? So it is trying to override the one method call. So set bean name. Okay, set bean name method it is going to call. Getting the point. And if I'm trying to override, if I'm trying to implement bean factory aware here. Getting the point. Bean factory aware, again we are going to override. So one more method, now you can see set bean factory. Getting the point. Here we are trying to set this particular bean factory. So whatever the bean factory object we are creating, like a container is going to create this, it will try to set. And if you are trying to use in your applications, wherever if it is required here, we are going to override this particular method called set bean factory. And after this, now what I am doing here, we are trying to call this particular pre-initialization. So the pre-initialization basically we'll try to call like this. So bean post processor. Whenever I'm trying to call this particular bean post processor, again internally we'll override the methods here. Now you can see how many methods we are having. So post process before initialization, post process after initialization. So the method itself is providing this particular information. If I'm trying to provide any logic before this particular object is created, and before destroying this particular object, if we want to provide anything, these methods are going to call internally. These methods are going to call internally. This is the way of like implementing this particular method. Now, if you are trying to like implementing, these are all the methods, like these are all the interfaces. What happens internally? It will try to call one by one. Okay. So we identified this is we are going to create. So instantiation, and we are going to populate this particular properties here, and later so something like bean name aware. Sorry. Okay, bean name aware, and another one bean factory aware. Get the point? Bean factory aware, and internally, so this is the bean post processor. Get the point? Bean post processor. The bean post processor basically it will try to look up the like a pre-initialization and post-initialization. So after this, we have some other interfaces we need to identify here, and what we are trying to discuss here. And here we'll try to call the custom method. So right now we cannot discuss this particular custom method. We'll see we are having so some two interfaces we need to discuss here. Something like what we can call it as a disposable we are going to call, but this particular disposable bean we cannot identify it is going to call or not. For example, if I'm going to implement this also. So disposable bin. This particular disposable bin basically it is having what is the method we are having. If I'm going to show you this destroy method. Okay, even though if I'm trying to write this particular destroy method, so in our example we cannot identify whether the destroy method is going to call, because the destroy method is going to call before the object is going to remove from the container. So which object here? This particular object. Whatever this particular round table object we are trying to create here, this particular object before destroying from the container, it will call this particular destroy method. Okay, these are all the very important method we need to understand here. This is the life cycle of this particular bean here. So what is the bean we are creating? Something like round table. Now what I will do, I'm going to print this particular methods with the help of this particular all the sys out here. Okay, all the sys out I'm going to provide, and simply set bean name, and here I'm going to provide the name. Okay, and here I'm trying to providing this particular information, something like set bean factory, and here here we are trying to discuss about the bean factory. And another important information what we need to understand here. So this is basically, so before initialization, I'm trying to call this particular method post process before initialization, and simply I'm going to provide the this particular bean name. And another one I'm trying to call this particular after initialization. Okay, after initialization, and destroy method. Sorry. So finally, I'm calling this particular destroy method. So we cannot identify when this particular destroy method will call. Okay, these are all the methods I'm implementing here, and with help of this particular all the interfaces whatever we are having. Getting the pen, all the interfaces whatever we are having. Now, if I'm going to run this, what you are understanding here? How many the methods we are calling? First one it is calling set bean name, getting the pen, and after this set bean factory it is calling. After this, it is trying to call this particular set bean factory, and internally it is trying to return the whatever the object we are having. First one is round table and another one is guest one. So where we created these objects basically inside this particular our configuration file. So round table is the one and guest one is another object. Getting the point? So which method it is calling basically? So this is the method set bean factory. Getting the point? Whenever we are calling this particular set bean factory, internally the object we are printing. Now if you go to this round table, here the second method, here I'm trying to print this particular object, bean factory object I'm printing. Now, so this is the method it is calling here. Okay, so this is the method it is trying to call this particular information, and the same way we can identify this particular, so pre-initialization bean post to processors. So anything we are missing, I think bean post to processors. We'll see bean factory post to processor. What is the name of this particular bean? Let me post to processor. Configurable list of bean we are having here. And I'm going to call this, and here I will pause this, and finally I'm going to comment out these two sections because the interface we are not using here. Now again I'm going to run this. Now you can see the post process bean factory it is calling here. Getting the point? So far how many methods we implemented here? So the destroy is not going to call because so we cannot identify when we are trying to remove the object from this particular container. The container is going to take care of this particular section. But before destroying the object, if you want to perform any operations, you can perform this. Okay, this is the purpose of the destroy method. Now you can see the post process bean factory it is calling it post process bean factory, and the remaining two methods. Whatever we define here, the two methods are calling it. This is the important information we need to understand. This is, we'll call it as a life cycle of this particular bean here. Okay, any questions here? Any questions regarding this particular beam life cycle, how it is going to work internally, and if I want to perform the operations before this particular object creation, and another one after creating this particular object. So these are all the interfaces we need to implement, and each and every interface is having some specific method. We need to override the method so that we can write the specific logic, if whatever the logic we want to write before the object creation and after the object creations here. Okay, so if we don't have anything now, so imagine this is important the life cycle, because whenever any application we are writing or any program we are implementing it, the life cycle is important, how it is going to work and how it is the objects are going to created under the Beam Factory or application context. So same, the application will work internally for this particular Beam Factory as well as application context here. And now you can see after completion of this particular life cycle, now I'm going to create the simple bean, how we can perform the simple example here. Let me create another example here. The example basically I'm trying to perform some operations here. So to perform some operations, now what I'm doing here, I'm creating one interface here, something like performer. Okay, this performer basically what it will do internally, it is trying to perform something like I'm going to add the void method and we are going to perform. Okay, this is the method I'm trying to write, and after this now what I'm doing is, so we are going to throw some exception. Okay, performance exception. Now what we can do, we need to create this particular object, the exception object we need to create. Now here I'm trying to create this particular exception here. Now what we can do, we can write the particular two parameters. So this is the default constructor I'm trying to add. Another one I'm trying to add parameterized constructor. So in our example, these two are the enough here. String message, and what I will do here, I'm going to call super. I'm not going to do any changes here because I'm giving the option to create the super class object here. Okay, this is we need to create. Now observe carefully, we have a one interface called performer, and internally we are going to call this particular perform method to perform the various operations here. Okay, this is the interface we created. Now later, now what I'm trying to do is, I'm trying to perform the something song related sections here. Okay, I'm interested in the singing a song here. Now what we will do, we'll try to write the song class here. Getting the point? Whenever we are trying to write this particular song class, now what we will do internally, we'll try to implement this. Okay, so I'm trying to write this particular performer, and I'm implementing this particular method. And what we will do, we'll try to perform this particular song. Now I'm trying to add something like the property. So this particular property we are going to perform here. Now basically this particular person at a time, how many songs he can perform here. So the simple example I'm trying to write something like items, or we can see number of songs. Okay, and later now what I'm doing is, I'm trying to create the one constructor. Okay, and so one more constructor I want to create for this particular parameterized constructor. And here now what I'm doing is, so into songs, we'll try to give this particular songs is fine. and number of songs is equals to songs. Okay, and internally, whenever we are calling this particular perform method, we'll print this particular message. We'll try to print this particular message, something like so what is the song basically. So I want to provide, this is the music we are going to get whenever it's trying to perform this particular song. Okay, so observe now what I'm doing it for this. Basically, simply what we will do, we'll create an object. Okay, we'll create an object and we'll try to call this particular method so that it will try to run this particular example. But the problem, whenever I'm trying to modify this, that is important here. I want to provide this particular explicit value. Okay, now what I will do here, I'm going to give initializing as a 3. So initially by default, as a person, he can he can perform this particular songs at a time as a 3, but this particular value we can modify later. So now observe carefully how I'm going to modify this particular value. Inside this particular same example, I'm commenting this section we are not going to use, and I commented here. Okay, after commenting again, we need to create the bean ID. Okay, we need to create the bean ID, and after this, now what I'm doing here, I'm trying to provide the ID. So what is an ID we can provide? Something like you can give any song, and so class we need to provide something like com dot spring dot core dot something like a song class. Okay, this particular song class can contain the one constructor here. Okay, if you are not providing the constructor, what happens internally? The default value, it is going to work. So observe carefully. Right now, I'm not providing anything. So this particular song, I'm going to give to the core. And here, let me, what we can do, I'm going to copy and comment. And here I'm trying to paste. So after this, so here I'm going to modify this, and here what we can do, performer, and this also I'm going to modify. So I will keep this as it is. What is the method we are having? Something like perform, and this is the void method. This is the void method. It's trying to throw an exception. We'll try to use this particular exception with a declaration. Now you can see what happening here. Whatever the message we added, the message is getting. But here, what we need to understand carefully, if I'm going to, where is this song? Okay, along with this particular message, now what I will do, here I'm going to provide this particular number of songs here. Getting the point? So the number of songs. Now carefully observe right now how many we are getting here? Only 3. Because this is the default value. But I want to give explicit value. Like I don't want to use this particular static here. What is the best way of using this information? Now go to this particular class and use the constructor or, and here now you can see value. So what is the value you can provide? Whatever you are interested. So right now I'm giving 10. Right now I'm giving this particular 10 value, and if I'm going to run this particular same example, what happening here? Whatever this particular default value we have 3, now it is replaced with this particular 10 here. But how I'm modifying it? That is, we are trying to use this particular one more property, something like constructor argument here. Because internally inside this particular song class, now what I'm doing is I'm trying to pass this particular one parameter that is expecting integer as a song value here. Getting the point? This is important here. So this is the way of providing the value in the configuration file so that it will try to reusable wherever you are trying to use here. So any questions? Any questions regarding this particular performer example? Okay, this particular constructor related example is important here whenever we are trying to pass any the explicit constructor parameter. Now what is the tag we are going to use? Something like the constructor arg tag here. Okay, so if you are not interested this, you cannot provide the value. For example, what happens internally, I'm trying to comment out this, and the same way here I will comment this. The default object I'm going to comment. Whenever I'm commenting these two, now if I'm going to run this, now what happening internally? We are getting an exception. Getting the point? We are getting an exception. So what is an exception we are getting? Something like no such method exception. And now you can see com.spring.code.song class. It is trying to initialize with the default constructor. Getting the point? It is trying to initialize with this particular default constructor. So this is the big exception we are getting. Now finally you can see this particular message here. Okay, if you are trying to comment on the default constructor, we need to provide the explicit constructor here. This is the normal Java class only we identified whenever we are trying to work with the constructor. We already identified here how this particular example it is going to work. So if the default constructor is no longer available, we cannot create the object with help of this particular default constructor, because here we are defining one parameterized constructor. One parameters constructor we are using. Now what is the best way of using it? You can enable this. Okay, you can enable this particular constructor and now run the same class. Now you can run the same class. Now we are getting an output here. Getting the point? This is we need to understand here. Any questions? Any questions regarding this particular constructor? Okay, if we don't have anything, now what I will do, here I'm going to write another important information here. So basically, if I want to modify the value like whatever we discussed internally, the round table, and the particular round table internally, it is trying to use this particular guest object. Okay, guest object here, we try to come up with a multiple guest object here. Based on our requirement, we are going to change this particular guest object here. Okay, and here whenever you are having two parameters, okay, whenever you are having two parameters, how we are going to pass? For example, this particular song internally it is expecting one more property. For example, just imagine I'm trying to comment out this, I'm not going to write, but you need to so give me the output what how we can like configure this particular the property whatever I'm trying to define. Okay, the line number 5 I'm trying to define here something. Getting the point? So along with this particular song, so it's going to come up with a dance also. Along with particular song, he's trying to dance. Now, this is the one object here, and this particular object here I'm going to use. Okay, here I'm going to use. Now observe what are all the changes we need to add inside this particular configuration file. So can you explain me anyone? So what are the changes information we need to add here? No idea? Good. Okay. Now, what I'm trying to explain here, this is important here. Same now you can think here. So this is the one property. It's like the name of the property what we use inside this particular round table, and we come up with one guest here, one guest object. And here in the song related, now what I'm doing is one more object I'm defining something like dance. Now it is a object type. It is not a something like the primitive type. Whenever it is an object here, now what we will do, we'll go to this particular configuration file, and first I'm going to copy this. So one more constructor we need to specify because he is expecting two parameters. The first one we are going to give as a the particular integer value, And second one, we are not going to use this particular value. This particular value, it is not suitable for this particular dance here. Now what we can do, we need to use a ref here. We need to use this particular ref attribute here because it is a object type. Whenever we are using this particular ref type, again, what we can do, we need to create this particular object like this. Okay, so we need to create this particular object like this. So we can pass something like com.dance. Okay, these are all the changes we need to provide whenever we are having the object like this here. Getting the point? Because it is an object here and we are trying to pass the same object as a constructor parameter. So because we are using this particular song constructor parameter, and here inside this particular configuration file, we can define the one more constructor, the argument like the attribute here, and internally we can pass this particular bean here. This particular bean will create object of this particular dance, and this particular dance reference information, it will try to set into this particular song here. Okay, these are all the important information we need to understand here.
The class information, I think you should give the complete com.
Yes, correct.
Code.
Yes, correct. We need to give the fully qualified name here. Without this, it is not going to create object. So container cannot understand here where exactly the particular class is available. So if I'm trying to give this, it will try to load the with the help of this particular package name here. Okay, so any questions?
So again, you would also have to create a dance class with the exception and all.
That if you are interested, you can go for this particular exception related. But most of the cases we are not using the exception because each and every class we are not going to use the exception.
Okay. Okay.
What are the required classes we'll have? So for those classes we can create the exception. Just I'm giving the example in the real time how we are going to create the exception. So this is the same syntax we are going to create in the real time applications. There is no changes here, but the classes names and the properties are going to differentiate.
Okay. Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay, so now I already provide the information regarding this particular constructor injection and setter injection. So which is the best one for the mandatory object? Getting the point. So if you see this particular song internally, if it is going to depends on this particular dance object whatever we created so far, then we can go for the constructor. Getting the point. So otherwise we can create the method, whatever the method we created. So I hope here only. So inside this particular round table. So this is the way we can create a method, but the naming convention should match here because what are the property we are defining? The guest property, the name also it's look like same here. So it is a one setter method, set guest here. So it should match here. If it is not matching here, the object is not going to inject it automatically. Okay, whenever we are trying to discussing this particular setter related information, the naming convention we need to follow, and it is a optional. So optional in that case, basically, once a object is created, once a round table object is created, if it is required, we are going to call this particular method. Otherwise, we are not going to call. But how it is going to call here? So the section information we are going to provide something like a property. This property. If you are not defining this particular property, what happens internally? It will not give you any error. So happily, we can run this particular example. For example, I'm trying to comment out this, and again I will enable this particular section here. So control shift, so forward slash and backward slash. We need to use this particular 2 slashes if I want to comment to this particular section. So first I will give you the shortcut here. Control plus shift plus, getting the pen. So this particular slash, what it will do, it will try to comment the code. Okay, same way, if you are trying to use this particular slash, it will try to uncomment the code. So these two sections will be same. Control plus shift plus forward slash and backward slash, it will try to comment the code and uncomment the code. Okay, So this is also important here. So how we are developing the code, the shortcuts also very important. Now, if we observe, now I'm trying to write to control plus O. This particular control plus O, now what is happening internally? If we go to this particular greeting service sample, if I'm going to use control plus O, these are all the information we are going to get, like the property, constructor, and method. Getting the point? These are all the information. If I want to get this, you need to use the control plus O, and this shortcut only work in the Eclipse. If you are trying to work with any IntelliJ or the different ID, so you need to check what are the different shortcuts here. Okay, so now back to here. What we need to understand here, Spring Core. I enable this particular section guest 2, and internally, okay, I will comment on this. I don't want to use this particular property. If I'm not using this, we'll go to this particular main class, and this also I'm going to comment out, and this particular section I will enable. Okay, so if I'm going to enable this particular section, now you can see, so any exception, here we are getting an exception. So now you can see line number 24. If you observe carefully, here I'm getting a guest. So I explain here, getting the point. If I'm not using this particular guest object, even we are not going to get anything. Getting the point. The application is not stopping here. We can happily run the application. But here, with help of this particular null object, we are trying to call this particular method called load person. Because of this, we are getting an exception. But if I'm trying to comment this, what I will do, here I'm going to comment out this, and simply so person, okay, so we don't have any exception. Now, so before going to see this, I will go to this particular class, and here I will generate the default constructor. Okay, after generating this, I will come back to here. Okay, now this is an object I'm creating. Now if I'm going to run the same example one more time, now you can see any exception we are getting here? Nothing. We are not getting any exception. But now you can see, so we are trying to return the default constructor. Because of this, we are not getting any object. But what you understand here, without this particular guest object, getting the point, without this particular guest object, happily we are able to run this example. But now, so if you observe carefully, if I'm going to add this, if I'm going to add this section, this is important, you need to understand. Guest is equals to guest. Whenever I'm trying to add this particular information, if I'm going to run the same example, if I'm going to run this particular example, application is stopped here. It is not running here. Okay. Now, at this time, you need to understand the method related section. Whatever the method we used here, if this method is not calling, nothing is happening. Getting the point. The application is running successfully. But whenever we're trying to add this particular parameter, the dependent object to parameter, getting the point. The dependent object, this particular constructor parameter, what happens internally? It is throwing an exception. If you read this particular exception, you will understand. Now you can see. So did you specify the correct bean references as a constructor argument? Getting the point. So this particular message we are getting here, whatever the references we are providing, the references constructor argument, it is not matching here. It's like a constructor parameter, it is not matching here. Why it is not matching here? Right now, if we observe here, how many parameters we are having? 2 parameters. And in the configuration file, how many parameters I'm trying to get? Only 1 file. Okay, only 1 file. Because of this, now what happens internally? We are getting an exception. This is important. Now you can see for the constructor, if you miss the parameter, application is stopping. Okay, even for this particular setter, if I'm not calling the particular property, application is not stopping. Okay, the application is not stopping. Happily, we are able to run this particular example here. But now what we can do, you can write the simply, like you can write this particular constructor, and what you can do, provide this particular guest one here. Okay, provide this particular guest one. Now go to this particular same example, and you can run the same example, whatever the output we are getting. But finally, so I'm trying to return every time as a new object. Here I'm trying to return the every time new object. Because of this, the last statement we are getting as a null record. Okay, so now if you comment this, if you comment out and if you run this example, happily whatever the output we expected earlier, the same output we are going to get here. Okay, the same output we are getting here. This is the important information we need to understand here. So is it clear? The constructor injection, setter injection. This is very, very important we need to understand. Okay, still if anyone having any questions, so you can ask me regarding this particular dependency injection. Okay, so if we don't have anything, now I'm going to come up with how we can like access the property information. For example, what are all the properties we are having, how I'm going to use. So this is the simple information we are going to use, something like a setter related example. And here I'm trying to create one class. This particular class I'm going to come up with a instrument list. Okay, instrument list. Now this particular instrument list internally, it is trying to implement the same whatever the performer we created. And what I'm doing here, I'm trying to override this particular method. Okay, so after overriding this, now what I will do, I'm going to provide the default constructor first, and later now what I'm doing here, I'm trying to providing this particular one of the important property. Okay, so one of the important property, something like a song. Okay, after this, inside this particular property, like inside this particular perform method, I'm going to print this playing this particular song. Okay, this is I'm doing. Now what you need to understand here, this particular object, getting the point, this particular instrument list internally, it is trying to work on the another object called instrument here. Okay, so this is the one variable I'm trying to declare here. And now what I'm doing is I'm trying to provide this particular two methods. So here only I'm trying to providing the first method, public void set to song. This is important. Okay, internally sing song. Okay, this dot song is equals to song. And later public void set instrument. So now if you see, I should be capital. Okay, this particular I should be capital. Now finally, so instrument, what happened, why it is moved here? Here this information is moved here. Now instrument is equals to one more instrument. Okay, so this is I'm trying to set. Now finally what we will do, we are going to create the one more instrument object here. Getting the point? This is important here. So here this instrument I'm going to create as a interface. So whenever we are discussing it, this interfaces are important here. So create an interface here, and this interface internally it will contain play. Okay, play method. Now if we observe internally what we can do, so far we are not doing anything here. Can you understand? So far we are not doing anything. So recording this particular instrument, what we can do here, we can call this particular play method, instrument dot play method. Okay, the perform method basically it is trying to playing this particular song, and internally it is going to play one of the instrument information, one of the instrument. Now you can see again here also we are trying to creating one interface, and we are going to come up with the implementation class. So what is the implementation class we are going to create here? Something like what is the implementation object we can provide? Let me implement this one more class here. So instrumental list, it will try to set this particular song, and what is the name we can take? Here I am going to use piano. Okay, I'm going to use this particular piano. This piano, it is going to use this particular instrument here. Okay, I missed this implement here. And what I will do, I'm going to implement this simple message. I'm not going to write much code here. Simple message. Okay, this is a message. But now what we can do here, we are going to create this particular object here, the way whatever the way we created. This is the one of the real-time example. Now you can see based on this particular, if you are trying to implement any instrument related application, so this is the classes and interfaces we are going to create, and finally we'll try to construct the object like this. So what is the base class here? Okay, first what we will do, what is the base class we are having? The base class basically here, first we need to check something like instrument list. Instrument list internally, it is trying to call this particular performer. Now you can see Control E. Control E basically it will try to provide the what are all the files we open here. Okay, this is the one more shortcut here. Now you can use Control E, and you can paste this particular with the ID. The first character should be small. Okay, so class and the same Control E. Now you can copy this particular instrument list, and so try to add this particular com dot spring dot core dot whatever we created this particular instrument list. But now internally how many properties expecting? So two properties. First one is a song, second one is a instrument. Now what I'm doing it for this particular song, we are going to use the property. The name I'm going to provide as a song, and the value I'm going to provide as a something. What is a song we can provide? Something. Okay, something like jingle bells. One is the song I'm trying to providing, and another property we are going to use something like instrument, and this is an object. So what we will do, we'll provide the INST. So this is the reference. So you can take any name. References name is basically you can take any name, and after this I'm trying to create the bean ID. So the ref and ID should match here. Ref and ID should match. So finally com dot spring dot core, yeah, core dot what is the class? Now what I'm doing it, something like a piano. This is the class we are going to provide. After providing this particular configuration, get it? After providing this particular configuration, now what we are doing it, we are going to the main file here. So I'm going to copy this. After copy, I'm going to comment out. Here I'm going to provide, and here what is the name of the bean ID we need to pass. So what is our main class here? something like a performer. This we need to pass here. Okay, and we can modify this section. And here reference name I did not modify here. So finally I'm going to call this particular perform. If I'm going to run here, now you can see it is trying to call this. So it's trying to play this particular song, and internally we are trying to playing this particular instrument, something like a piano. Okay, this is the one more example I provided. This is the one more example I provided. This is very important. Getting the point. And if we are having inner beans, if we are having this particular inner beans, how we are going to use? Getting the point. Basically here, so the whatever this particular instrument we are having, the instrument basically we are going to come up with the inner bean here. Getting the point. So how we are going to write this particular section? Instead of this particular reference here, I am going to write as a inner object. Let me go to this. Here inside this, here we are using this particular property. Okay, the property right now we are using this particular reference. Okay, now whenever we are using this particular reference, now what we can do here, we can provide the closing break here. Okay, after providing this particular closing break, now I am removing this, and internally what are the properties we are having? What are the properties we are having? Now you can see one more property we are having, something like bean. Something like bean. Okay, this particular bean now it is comes under this particular property tag. We open the property tag and we close this. Inside the property we are having this particular bean. Whenever we are trying to write this section we'll call it as a inner beans here. Okay, whatever we define, this section we can move into this particular location. But here we are not going to use any ID. Here we are not going to use any ID. So directly we'll use this particular class. Okay, now if I'm going to run this, now what happening internally? The same output we are getting. The same output we are getting. So either you can go for this particular reference, or we can go for the inside the property tag, you can declare this particular bean. But whenever we are trying to declare this cannot contain the ID. Getting the point? So ID here only we are going to use. The ID we are going to use inside this particular instrument. Getting the point? This is the another important information for this particular inner beans here. The same thing it is applicable for the constructor also. Okay, for this particular constructor also we can add same property, whatever we are adding this particular bean factory. Inside the constructor we can add, inside this particular property also we can add the particular bean information. Okay, so any questions? Any questions regarding this particular instrument related example? Okay, so far whatever we discussed here, we discussed a single object here. Getting the point? If you go to the any class round table, we define only one object, or if you go to this particular instrument list, we are defining only one object. But now I want to use collection of object here. How we can use the particular collection of object? This is important we need to understand here. Getting the point? And what are all the different types of collections we are having? Now if you see, first one we are having list, and another one we are having set, and another one we are having map, and last one we are having getting the point. Another one we are having props. So these are all the four attributes we are going to use under this particular collections here. Getting the point? This is important. Each and every collection it is going to store as a multiple values. So far we are trying to use only one object here, but using this particular 4 attributes, we are going to store multiple objects. We'll see how this particular each and every the attribute is going to work. So I think same, whatever we discuss about the list and whatever this particularly is set and whatever we discuss this particular map, and the same thing it is applicable inside this particular Spring Core. Like this is allow duplicate element here. Get in the pen. So duplicate elements it will allow, and here it is not going to allow duplicate elements, and it will try to come up with a key and value. And here this is also will allow key and value, but this should be string types. The key and value should be string type, and this particular map you can take anything. This particular map you can take any the data type, but whenever we are using this particular prop, we should define the key and value as a string data type here. Getting the pen. So this is, we need to understand these are all the 4 tags how it is going to use inside this particular Spring Core here. Okay, now we'll identify a simple example, this particular example how it is going to work. Now what I will do here, only I'm trying to providing this particular instrument here. Okay, whatever the instrument we are providing, here I'm going to provide list. Okay, the element type I'm going to use same thing as it is list here. Now I will copy and I will paste it here. Okay, so whenever I'm pasting it here, now what happening internally, we cannot call this because it is a list type here. Because it is a list type. Now what we can do, we need to provide the loop here because it's going to take multiple objects. Now what is the best way of calling this? And inside this for each, now I'm going to call in dot play. Okay, in dot play. This is we are going to use by calling this particular one by one here. Now observe carefully, we are using this particular list of object. So without modifying anything, if I'm going to run, now what happening internally? What happening internally? We are getting only one record here. Whatever we define here, we are getting only one record. But what you need to understand, so we should provide the multiple records here. Here, where it is expecting list of object, but we are passing as a one object. But how we can pass multiple object? Now, if you see, where is this? Inside this particular property, we cannot use this particular one. Okay, first what I will do, here I am going to use the one list tag. Okay, I'm closing this. After closing this, you can add multiple objects. So far, how many objects we are having? Only one object. The same object I'm trying to add multiple times. The same object I added multiple times here. Now, if I'm going to run this particular example, what happens internally? Now you can see it is trying to call the same method multiple times. The same method it is trying to call multiple times. Okay, so one more example before going to discuss about with another example. Here, if I'm going to set as a set information, not this particular list here. Now I'm using set information. Now the same example I'm going to run. Now you can see what happening internally. We are getting all the records here. So why we are getting this particular all records here? Because set basically it will not allow duplicates here. But why it is allowing this particular duplicates here? Getting the point. This is important here. So any file we are not missing to save, all the file we are saving, but still we are getting. Any idea? Okay, so I will explain this. Now if we observe carefully, So this is a section we are going to use here, and I will remove this, like I'm not going to use this section. So inside the set, I'm going to use one ref attribute. Okay, the ref attribute will contain bean here. Okay, observe carefully. The ref attribute internally, it is contain this particular bean. Now, what I'm doing here, this is the bean I'm going to provide. Okay, this is the bean I'm going to provide internally. We'll try to use this particular ref here. Now, if we observe, I'm trying to set multiple times. Now you can see how many times it is calling. Only one time it is calling. But here, how many times we added the ref attribute? So now if you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. We added 5 times here, but only it is calling one time. Getting the point? Now again, I'm going to set as a list here. Here, I'm going to set as this particular list here. So observe carefully. Again, I'm trying to run same example. Now you can see it is trying to call 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Getting the point? So list is allowing the duplicate and set is not allowing. But the question here, previously I used this particular bean. How many objects I added? All the times it is called here. Any idea why it is called multiple times? So why it is not calling here? Earlier, why it is called multiple times, even though we use a set here? The set will not allow the duplicates here. But anyway, it is allowing the duplicates and it is calling the multiple times. Okay, no idea. Okay, so what I want to provide, because whenever we are trying to use this particular inner beans, whenever we are trying to use this particular inner beans, we are going to specify this particular classes, something, any class, string dot, core dot, any class we can discuss. So we'll use the same. Okay, what happening internally? Every time it will try to create a new object. Each and every object will contain the unique references here. Getting the point? So each and every object internally, it will contain the unique object references. Because of that, the objects, even though the name of the object is same, but the object creation is unique. For example, so here, this is the heap memory, and we are trying to creating the multiple piano objects here. But here, this particular section, line number 27, I added multiple times, and it will contain the hash code, something like at the rate. So 1 to 46 D F some value. Okay, 1. And this section will contain for 12 46 F and G1. Getting the point? And this will contain 12 46 and GH1. Getting the point? So this is the way of this particular object internally it is going to create. Because of this, even though we are trying to providing multiple times, each and every object it is going to take as a unique object. Okay, this is we need to understand. This is each and every reference here, the object references. The references will contain the unique information. Okay, because of this, whatever the object we added, it is trying to call multiple times here. But right now you can see we provided ref is multiple, but object is only same. The bean we created only one, but we are using multiple times this particular references. Because of this, what happening internally, for the set related section, it is calling only one time. For this particular list related, because the list will allow multiple like duplicate records here, because of that it is trying to call multiple times. Okay, so is it clear? Any questions? Okay, so now what I will do, I'm going to discuss about the map related example. So how we can discuss this particular map related example? This is important here because we identify the set and list related. Now we are trying to discuss about the map. So to discuss this particular map related, now what we can provide, we need to modify this. What is the instrument list? Okay, instead of this particular list, now what I will use, I'm going to use the map here. The map internally, it will contain string as a key, instrument as a object. Okay, string as a key and instrument as a object here. Now I'm modifying this. Okay, here we need to replace this section. So how we can replace this? And instrument I'm trying to call here, instrument dot, we can call the same for each here, and internally we can use key comma value, and here what we can do, the key we can print here. So sysout, here I'm going to print key, and here, so one more sysout I'm trying to print, sorry. Let me see. Okay, sysout is not printing. Comma value dot, what is the method we can call? Playwright. Oh, it is missing. Why it is missing? It should work basically. Yes. And why we are getting anything? The closing bracket is missing. Let's see where it is open. This is system.out.println. Here system.out.println key, the same sysout value dot play method. Okay, I think play is a Y type. Sorry, maybe it's because of this we are getting an error. Now you can see, now what I will do, we have a map here. Okay, now we are using the map key comma value. The key we are trying to provide as a string, and the value we are trying to provide as a map. Now where I am going to modify, here only we are going to modify. So in place of this particular list, now what I will do, here I am going to provide as a map here. Okay, in place of this particular list, I am going to provide a map. Now map cannot contain this particular ref. Map will contain, map will contain this particular entry tag here. Now you can see I'm going to provide, now if I'm trying to use entry tags, and internally the entry will contain key and value. Okay, if you are not interested this particular key, now you can go for the key ref. So it will try to point to the wherever we are trying to use this particular key. So I'm not using the key ref here, I'm using only key here. Now what is the key we can use? Okay, so I'm trying to use this particular piano, and here the value I cannot use because it is an object here. Instrument is an object, so we can go for the value ref, the same inst. Okay, the same inst I'm using, whatever we are using this particular piano I'm using. So I'm going to create multiple records. Okay, so around 5 or 4 records I'm trying to create here. So guitar I'm using, and something like what we can use, INST I'm trying to use, key, and something like IMPL I can use, so instrument IMPL, and the last object what we can use, something like a string I'm going to use. Okay, these are all the keys I'm providing. So these are all the keys I'm providing, and these are all the values here. Now if I'm going to run this is important, we need to understand here. If I'm going to run this particular example, now you can see, so this is the key and this is the value. This is the key and this is the value. Okay, this is the key and this is the value. Finally, this is the key and this is the value. Okay, so these are all about the key and value. Okay, value I provide as the same, but key I provide as a different. But what you can do, so you can go for this particular instrument object multiple. You can create a multiple different types of instruments. So far we are having only one instrument. Now I'm using the same instrument as a value. So you can create with the different instrument object you can pass here. The reference variable you can pass multiple, and whenever you are passing this particular value reference, the object, like this particular bean type, it should be different here. Okay, it should be different here. So this is all about the map related example. Any questions regarding this particular map? Okay, so if we don't have anything, the last pending we are having something like a properties. The particular properties we are going to use in the tomorrow session. We'll see how this particular properties we are going to use. After this particular property, we'll try to work on some null values. After this, we are going to discuss about the one of the important example called auto wiring. Okay, the auto wiring concept we'll discuss in the tomorrow session here. Any questions regarding our today's session? Anyone, anything you want to discuss here? No? Okay, I'm not seeing any response. I hope all are clear. Okay, we'll continue tomorrow.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all.